The freezing wind howled like a wounded animal across the Wyoming plains when Benjamin Brooks first saw the woman stumbling through the white curtain of snow. Her dark cloak whipping around her like raven wings against the merciless blizzard of February 1878. He had been checking on his horses in the small barn adjacent to his cabin, making certain they had enough hay to weather what was shaping up to be one of the worst storms he had witnessed in his 5 years of living alone in this remote stretch of land, 15 miles north of the nearest settlement. The woman appeared like an apparition through the swirling whiteness, moving with the desperate slowness of someone on the edge of complete exhaustion. Benjamin did not hesitate. He rushed out into the brutal cold, his boots sinking deep into the rapidly accumulating drifts, and reached her just as her legs buckled beneath her. "I have got you," he shouted over the wind, catching her weight against his chest. She was slight, shivering so violently he could feel it through both their layers of clothing. Her lips had taken on a frightening blue tinge, and her eyes struggled to focus on his face. "Please," she managed through chattering teeth. "My horse. The wagon overturned." "Where?" Benjamin asked, already knowing it was likely futile. In this storm, a person could die within yards of shelter and never know salvation was close. "I do not know. I walked. So cold." Her words slurred together, and Benjamin recognized the dangerous signs of someone slipping toward the sleep that would not wake. "Save your strength," he commanded, shifting her weight and lifting her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, and the terror of how frail she felt spurred him to move faster through the thigh-high drifts back toward his cabin. The wind fought him for every step, but Benjamin had spent years working cattle drives and building his homestead with his own 2 hands. He was not a small man at 28, standing well over 6 feet with broad shoulders that now bent into the gale. The warmth of the cabin hit them like a wall when he kicked the door open and stumbled inside. Benjamin did not waste time with niceties. The woman was in genuine danger. Her body temperature dropped to a level that could prove fatal if not addressed immediately. He carried her to the large bed in the corner of the single-room cabin and began removing her wet outer garments with efficient, respectful movements. "I need to get you out of these wet clothes," he explained, even though her eyes had drifted closed. "I will preserve your modesty as much as possible, but you will die if we do not get you warm." Her cloak came off first, heavy with melted snow and ice. Beneath it she wore a black dress, also soaked through. Benjamin grabbed several of his own clean, dry shirts and a pair of wool long underwear, then turned his back to give her privacy. "Can you change yourself?" A weak sound, something between a sob and a laugh, was his only answer. Benjamin closed his eyes briefly, sending up a prayer for propriety and decency, then turned back around. "I am going to help you, but I give you my word as a gentleman that I will not take advantage. I only want to save your life." Working quickly but carefully, he helped her out of the sodden dress, averting his eyes as much as possible while ensuring she got into the dry clothes. She was too weak to help much, her fingers fumbling uselessly at buttons and laces. When she was finally changed, he wrapped her in every blanket and quilt he owned, then stoked the fire in the stone hearth until it roared with heat. Only then did Benjamin allow himself to really look at her face. She was beautiful in a delicate way, with dark hair that had come loose from its pins and now fell in damp waves around her shoulders. Her features were refined, speaking of some education and breeding, which made her presence out here in the middle of nowhere even more mysterious. He judged her to be in her mid-20s, though the pallor of cold made it difficult to tell for certain. He heated water for tea and prepared a simple broth from the venison stew he had made 2 days prior. When the tea was ready, he lifted her gently, supporting her against his chest, and brought the cup to her lips. Drink, he urged. Small sips. She obeyed with the automatic compliance of someone too exhausted to resist. After a few sips of the hot liquid, some color began returning to her face. Her eyes opened more fully, revealing irises the color of rich earth, dark brown with flecks of gold. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "You saved my life." "What is your name?" Benjamin asked, settling into the chair beside the bed, keeping the blankets tucked around her. "Tabitha Morrison," she replied, and even in her weakened state he heard the sorrow that weighted her words. I was traveling from Watsonville to stay with my sister in Montana. Alone. In February." Benjamin could not keep the incredulity from his voice. "That is a dangerous journey even in summer." Tabitha's eyes filled with tears that spilled down her temples into her hair. "My husband died 6 months ago. Influenza. I could not bear to stay in that house anymore, surrounded by all the memories. My sister wrote to me, begged me to come stay with her family. The driver I hired said he knew these trails well, that we could make good time before the worst of winter set in. Where is he now? I do not know. When the wagon overturned, one of the horses broke free and bolted. The other was trapped, screaming. It was terrible. The driver was trying to free the animal when I started walking to find help. He shouted after me, but I could not hear what he said over the wind. I thought I saw smoke from a chimney, but I must have become disoriented." Her voice broke. "Is he out there still? We have to help him." Benjamin stood, his jaw tight. "I will go look, but I need you to understand something. This storm is one of the worst I have seen. Visibility is near zero. I could walk in circles and never find him, or I could end up lost myself. But I give you my word I will try. Please," Tabitha said, struggling to sit up. "Please, you must try." Benjamin bundled himself in his heaviest coat, wrapped a thick scarf around his face, and took his rifle in case he encountered wolves or needed to signal his location. Before leaving, he gave Tabitha strict instructions to stay in bed, keep the fire fed, and not to worry if he was gone for several hours. The storm, if anything, had worsened. Benjamin tied a rope around his waist and secured the other end to a post near his door, giving himself a lifeline back to the cabin. He ventured out in widening circles, calling into the wind until his throat was raw. He searched for over 2 hours, pushing the limits of what was safe even with the rope to guide him home. He found no sign of the wagon, the horses, or the driver. The snow was falling so thick and fast that any tracks would have been obliterated within minutes. When Benjamin finally returned to the cabin, ice had formed on his beard and eyebrows. His fingers were numb despite his thick gloves. Tabitha was sitting up in bed, her face anxious in the firelight. "I am sorry," Benjamin said, pulling off his frozen outer layers. "I could not find anything." "The storm has covered everything." Tabitha's face crumpled. "He is dead, is he not? That poor man died because I hired him, because I had to run away from my grief." Benjamin moved to sit on the edge of the bed, his hand hovering uncertainly before settling on her shoulder. "You do not know that. He may have found shelter. These plains have old hunting cabins and caves. He knew the area. There is hope." But they both heard the doubt in his voice. Tabitha wept then, hard sobs that shook her whole body. Benjamin, who had lived alone for so long that he had nearly forgotten how to offer comfort, awkwardly gathered her into his arms and let her cry against his chest. He murmured meaningless reassurances, his large hand patting her back the way he remembered his mother doing when he was a child and had fallen and scraped his knees. Eventually, her tears subsided into hiccuping breaths. She pulled away, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "Forgive me. I am not usually so weak." "There is nothing weak about grief," Benjamin said quietly. "And you have had more than your share of it today. You need rest. Real rest. I will take the floor tonight." "I cannot take your bed," Tabitha protested. "This is your home. And you are my guest, one who nearly froze to death. I insist." His tone brooked no argument. Benjamin made himself a pallet near the fire, using his saddle as a pillow. It was not particularly comfortable, but he had slept in far worse conditions during his years working cattle drives from Texas to Montana. The sound of the storm battering the cabin walls was actually soothing in a way, a reminder that they were safe inside while nature raged without. As he lay there, listening to Tabitha's breathing even out into sleep, Benjamin realized how strange it felt to have another person in his space. After his parents died when he was 23, he had sold the family farm in Missouri and headed west, seeking a fresh start. He had worked various jobs before finally claiming this piece of land and building his cabin with his own hands. He ran a small herd of cattle, sold beef to the army fort 40 miles south, and kept mostly to himself. His nearest neighbor was 10 miles away. He ventured into town perhaps once a month for supplies and the occasional drink. It was a lonely existence, he supposed, but it suited him. Or at least, it had suited him until a freezing widow collapsed on his doorstep. The storm continued unabated for 3 full days. Benjamin and Tabitha fell into an uneasy routine born of necessity. He tended to his horses and brought in firewood. She insisted on helping prepare meals, though her grief would sometimes overwhelm her at unexpected moments, and she would have to sit down and weep quietly into her hands. During the long hours trapped inside by the weather, they talked. Benjamin learned that Tabitha had been married for 4 years to a banker named Robert Morrison. They had lived in Watsonville, Wyoming, in a nice house on the respectable end of town. Robert had been a good man, dutiful and kind, though Tabitha spoke of him with affection rather than passionate love. He had provided well for her, and she had been content if not deliriously happy. "We had hoped for children," Tabitha said on the second evening, staring into the fire. "But it never happened. Now I am glad. How much harder it would be if I had little ones to care for, to explain why their father would never come home." "You are still young," Benjamin offered. "You have much life ahead of you." Tabitha turned to look at him, and he was struck again by how pretty she was, especially now that the color had returned to her face and her eyes were no longer dull with hypothermia. "I do not think I will marry again. Once was enough." Benjamin did not argue, though he found himself oddly disappointed by her declaration. For his part, Benjamin shared stories of his cattle drive days, the characters he had met, the dangers he had faced. He told her about his parents, his mother's love of gardening, his father's skill with horses. He even admitted his loneliness, though he tried to frame it as preference for solitude rather than the aching absence it sometimes truly was. "Why did you never marry?" Tabitha asked him on the 3rd day, as she helped him prepare biscuits for their midday meal. She had proven herself surprisingly capable in the kitchen, despite her refined background. Benjamin was quiet for a long moment, his strong hands kneading the dough with practiced efficiency. "I suppose I never found the right woman, and then I came out here, and there are not exactly many options. The few single women in the area are either too young or already spoken for. I thought about advertising for a mail-order bride, but that always seemed like a gamble. What if we could not stand each other? What if you loved each other?" Tabitha countered softly. Their eyes met across the small table and something passed between them, a spark of awareness that made Benjamin's heart kick hard against his ribs. He looked away first, busying himself with the biscuits. On the 4th day, the storm finally broke. Benjamin woke to an eerie silence, the absence of howling wind so complete it was almost disconcerting. He rose and opened the cabin door to reveal a landscape transformed. Snow had drifted as high as the windows in places, and everything sparkled under a brilliant blue sky. "We need to try to find the wagon," Tabitha said, coming to stand beside him. "And the driver," Benjamin nodded grimly. "I will saddle my horse." "I am coming with you," she stated firmly before he could protest. "I need to see, I need to know." They bundled up warmly and set out, with Benjamin on his sturdy bay gelding and Tabitha riding behind him, her arms wrapped around his waist. The position was intimate, and Benjamin was acutely aware of her body pressed against his back, her breath warming the space between his shoulder blades. It took nearly an hour of searching before they found the overturned wagon. It was half buried in a drift, one wheel completely shattered. The horse that had been trapped was dead, frozen in its harness. Coyotes had already been at it. Tabitha turned away, her hand over her mouth. Benjamin searched the area but found no sign of the driver. "He must have tried to walk out, find shelter. The snow has covered any tracks." "He died because of me," Tabitha whispered. "No," Benjamin said firmly, taking her by the shoulders and making her look at him. "He died because of the storm, if he died at all. You cannot blame yourself for nature. That way lies madness." They salvaged what they could from the wagon. Tabitha's trunk of belongings had been thrown clear, and though some items were damaged, most of her clothes and personal effects were intact. Benjamin also found a small wooden box containing letters and what he assumed were mementos of her late husband. Back at the cabin, Tabitha was quiet, withdrawn. Benjamin gave her space, but as evening fell and she had barely touched her dinner, he decided intervention was necessary. "Tabitha," he said gently, kneeling beside her chair, "you have been through a terrible ordeal, but you survived. You need to honor that by continuing to live." "I do not know how," she admitted, her voice breaking. "Everything I was, everything I had is gone. My husband, my home, and now the guilt of that poor driver. What am I supposed to do now? How do I go forward?" Benjamin took her hands in his, surprised by his own boldness. "One day at a time, 1 hour at a time if you must. And you are not alone. I am here." "You have already done so much," Tabitha said, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You saved my life, given me shelter, asked nothing in return." "I ask nothing because I need nothing," Benjamin said. "Except perhaps—" He hesitated, then forged ahead. "Except perhaps the pleasure of your company for as long as you care to give it. I know you plan to go to your sister, but the passes north will not be clear for weeks yet. Stay here. Rest. Heal. And when spring comes, I will take you to Montana myself if that is still what you want." Tabitha searched his face, her brown eyes luminous in the firelight. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" "Because you are no longer a stranger," Benjamin said simply. "And because I have been alone a long time. Long enough to know that sometimes the most unexpected moments bring the greatest gifts." Slowly, Tabitha nodded. "I will stay. For now." The weeks that followed were some of the strangest and most wonderful of Benjamin's life. Having Tabitha in his cabin changed everything. She brought a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire and everything to do with human connection. She sang while she worked, her voice clear and sweet. She asked him questions about ranching and horses, and she actually listened to his answers, engaged and interested. She organized his chaotic collection of supplies, mended his clothes without being asked, and filled the cabin with small touches that made it feel like a home rather than just a shelter. Benjamin found himself watching her constantly, memorizing the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she concentrated, the small dimple that appeared when she smiled, the graceful movements of her hands. He was falling in love with her, he realized, with a mixture of joy and terror. Falling hard and fast despite all his intentions to remain a good host and nothing more. But Tabitha was a widow, still deep in mourning. She wore black every day, and sometimes he would catch her staring at nothing, her eyes distant with grief. Benjamin tried to respect her loss, to keep his growing feelings hidden, but it was becoming increasingly difficult. One evening in early March, as they sat together mending tack and socks respectively, Tabitha suddenly spoke. "My marriage was not a love match." Benjamin looked up, surprised. "What do you mean?" "I married Robert because it was expected. He was stable, respectable, and he offered me security. I cared for him, truly I did, but I was never in love with him." She set down her mending and met Benjamin's eyes. "I thought that was acceptable. I thought contentment was enough. But now I wonder if I cheated us both. What if there was someone out there who could have set his heart on fire the way he never quite did for me? What if I settled for less than real love because I was afraid to wait for it?" Benjamin set aside the bridle he was repairing. "I do not think you should torment yourself with such questions. You married him in good faith. You were a good wife. That counts for something. But what if there is more? What if love is supposed to be fire and passion and desperate longing? What if I will never know what that feels like?" Her voice was anguished, confused. Benjamin could not help himself. He crossed the small distance between them and took her hands. "Tabitha, love can be many things. Yes, it can be fire, but it can also be comfort. It can be laughing together over burnt biscuits. It can be sitting in companionable silence while the snow falls outside. It can be the way your heart lifts when you hear someone's footstep on the porch." "Is that what you believe?" she whispered. "That is what I am starting to learn," he admitted, "and I am learning it from you." Tabitha's breath caught. "Benjamin, what are you saying?" He had gone too far to retreat now. "I am saying that I have developed feelings for you, deep feelings. I know the timing is terrible. I know you are still grieving. I do not expect you to return my affection or to do anything about it. But I cannot keep pretending that having you here is only about hospitality. You have become essential to me, Tabitha. You have brought joy into a life I did not even realize was joyless." For a long moment, Tabitha simply stared at him. Then slowly, she turned her hands in his so that their fingers interlaced. "I feel it too," she whispered, "and it terrifies me. How can I feel this way so soon? What kind of woman does that make me?" "It makes you human," Benjamin said roughly. "It makes you alive." "I do not know what to do," Tabitha said, her eyes searching his face as if looking for answers written there. "Then do nothing," Benjamin suggested. "Let us simply be together. No expectations, no demands, just two people who enjoy each other's company. We can decide what it means when you are ready." Relief flooded Tabitha's features. "Yes, that sounds right. Can it be that simple?" "It can be anything we want it to be," Benjamin assured her. They stayed up late that night, talking in a way they had not before. Tabitha told him about the books she loved to read, the poems she had memorized as a girl. Benjamin shared his dreams of expanding his ranch, of one day having a real home with proper rooms instead of a single cabin. They laughed together, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. When they finally retired for the night, Benjamin to his pallet and Tabitha to the bed, something had shifted between them. There was an openness now, an acknowledgement of possibilities. The next few weeks passed in a blur of domesticity and growing intimacy. Benjamin taught Tabitha to ride his gentler mare, and they explored the land together when weather permitted. He showed her the creek where he caught trout in summer, the stand of aspens that turned golden in autumn, the high meadow where wildflowers would bloom come May. Tabitha, in turn, brought refinement to Benjamin's rough existence. She taught him card games her father had shown her as a child. She read to him in the evenings from a book of poetry that had survived the wagon accident. Her voice would wash over him as he sat whittling or mending, and he felt a contentment so complete it almost frightened him. They did not speak again of Benjamin's confession, but it hung between them in every glance, every accidental touch, every shared smile. The tension was sweet rather than uncomfortable, a growing awareness of what could be if they were brave enough to reach for it. In late March, as the snow began to melt in earnest and the first hints of green appeared in sheltered spots, two riders appeared on the horizon. Benjamin saw them from where he was repairing a section of fence and felt his stomach drop. He knew, somehow, that their arrival would change everything. The men turned out to be lawmen from Watsonville, a sheriff and his deputy. They had grim news. The body of the wagon driver, a man named Tom Fletcher, had been found 2 weeks prior when some of the snow had melted. He had made it within a mile of a small ranch house before succumbing to the cold. "We have been searching for you, Mrs. Morrison," the sheriff said, addressing Tabitha with his hat in his hands. "We found your wagon and feared the worst. Your sister in Montana has been sending telegrams, desperate for news." Tabitha stood on the cabin porch, her hand at her throat. "I am well, as you can see. Mr. Brooks saved my life." The sheriff looked between them, his expression assessing. "That is fortunate indeed. I imagine you will want to return to town with us, madam. There are arrangements to be made, decisions about your late husband's estate." "Estate?" Tabitha looked confused. "Yes, madam. His bank partner has been managing things, but there are papers that need your signature, and of course your sister will want to know you are safe." Tabitha glanced at Benjamin, her eyes wide. Yes, of course, but I need time to prepare." "We can wait until morning," the sheriff agreed. "We will camp nearby tonight if Mr. Brooks does not mind." Benjamin found his voice, though it felt like there was a stone in his chest. "You are welcome to share our fire and our meal." That evening was torture. Benjamin tried to act normally as they fed the lawmen and made small talk, but every moment was shadowed by the knowledge that Tabitha would be leaving in the morning. They had not discussed it explicitly, but what choice did she have? She had a life, responsibilities. And he was just a cowboy who had sheltered her through a storm. After the sheriff and deputy had gone to their bedrolls outside, Tabitha and Benjamin stood together in the cabin, the silence heavy between them. "I do not want to go," Tabitha said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know I must, but I do not want to." "Then come back," Benjamin said, the words bursting from him. "Handle whatever needs handling in town. Write to your sister, assure her you are well, but then come back here, to me, Benjamin." Tabitha's eyes filled with tears. "What are you asking?" "I am asking you to give us a chance," Benjamin said, crossing to her and taking her hands. "I am asking you to see if what we have found together can grow into something lasting. I am asking you to marry me, Tabitha. Not today, not until you are ready, but someday. Say you will at least consider it." "I am still in mourning," Tabitha protested weakly. "People will talk, they will say terrible things." "Let them talk," Benjamin said fiercely. "I have never cared much for other people's opinions. What I care about is you, us, what we could build together." Tabitha was crying openly now. "I have never been proposed to with such passion. When Robert asked me, it was over tea in my parents' parlor, terribly proper and formal." "And what did you say to him?" Benjamin asked, his heart hammering. "I said yes because it was the sensible thing to do." Tabitha reached up and cupped Benjamin's face in her hands. "But if I say yes to you, it will be because I cannot imagine saying anything else. It will be because you make me feel alive in a way I never have before. It will be because I am falling desperately in love with you, and the thought of leaving you tomorrow is breaking my heart." "Then do not break either of our hearts," Benjamin said roughly. "Say yes." "Yes," Tabitha whispered. "Yes, I will come back. Yes, I will marry you when enough time has passed. Yes to all of it, Benjamin. Yes." Benjamin pulled her into his arms and kissed her for the first time. It was gentle and fierce all at once, tasting of tears and promise. Tabitha kissed him back with an ardor that surprised them both, her fingers tangling in his hair, her body pressed against his. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Benjamin rested his forehead against hers. "How long will you be gone?" "I do not know. A few weeks at least. Maybe a month. There is the estate and I will need to pack my things properly, settle accounts." Tabitha's hands clutched at his shirt. "But I swear to you I will return." "I will wait," Benjamin promised. "I will wait as long as it takes." They stayed up the entire night, talking and stealing kisses, trying to fit a lifetime of courtship into a few short hours. When dawn came, they were still wrapped in each other's arms, neither wanting to let go. The sheriff was tactful enough not to comment on the obvious intimacy between them as Tabitha prepared to leave. Benjamin packed her trunk onto the spare horse the lawman had brought, his movements mechanical. When the time came to say goodbye, Tabitha threw her arms around his neck and kissed him in front of the lawman and God and anyone else who might be watching. "I will come back," she said fiercely. "I love you, Benjamin Brooks. I will come back." "I love you too," Benjamin said, the words still new and strange but feeling more right than anything he had ever spoken. "Ride safely." He stood watching until they were specks on the horizon, then nothing at all. The cabin felt cavernous and silent without her presence. Benjamin tried to throw himself into work, but everything reminded him of Tabitha. The mended clothes, the organized supplies, the book of poetry still sitting on the table. The weeks that followed were the longest of Benjamin's life. He worked from sunup to sundown, trying to tire himself out enough to sleep without dreaming of Tabitha. He rode into Watsonville twice, ostensibly for supplies but really hoping to hear news of her. The second time, the shopkeeper mentioned that Mrs. Morrison was staying at the hotel, sorting through her affairs before heading to Montana. Benjamin's heart sank. Montana. Was she going to her sister after all? Had she changed her mind? He was on the verge of riding into town and demanding answers when, 6 weeks after she had left, he saw a wagon approaching his land. His heart leaped into his throat. Even from a distance, he recognized the way she sat, the dark color of her dress. Tabitha. Benjamin ran to meet her, not caring how desperate he looked. She climbed down from the wagon before it had fully stopped, and then they were in each other's arms, holding on as if they could make up for all the lost time in one embrace. "You came back," Benjamin said, his voice rough with emotion. "I was starting to think I had dreamed you." "I am real," Tabitha assured him, laughing and crying at once. "And I am staying. I have settled everything in town. The estate has been sorted. Robert's partner bought out my interest in the bank. I wrote to my sister and explained everything. She wants to meet you, by the way. She says any man who could make me sound so happy in a letter must be worth knowing." Benjamin pulled back to look at her, hardly daring to believe it. "You sold everything. You are certain." "I have never been more certain of anything," Tabitha said firmly. "I brought what I could in the wagon. It is not much, but it is mine. I am yours if you will still have me." "If I will still have you," Benjamin let out a shaky laugh. "Tabitha, I have been half mad without you. Every day felt like a year." "Then we will have no more days apart," Tabitha declared. She looked around at the cabin, the land, the mountains in the distance. "This is my home now. This is where I belong." They unloaded the wagon together, Tabitha chattering about everything that had happened in Watsonville. There had been gossip, of course, about the widow who had shacked up with a cowboy during the blizzard. But Tabitha had held her head high and told anyone who would listen that Benjamin Brooks was the finest man she had ever known, and that she intended to marry him as soon as her mourning period ended. which, by my calculation, will be in 3 months, Tabitha said, her eyes dancing. October 1st. I thought perhaps we could be married then, if that suits you. I would marry you tomorrow if it were up to me, Benjamin said honestly, but I understand the need for propriety. October it is. The summer that followed was the happiest time of Benjamin's life. With Tabitha's help, he expanded his operation, buying more cattle with the money she had brought from her estate. She insisted on being a true partner, learning the business and working alongside him. She could not rope or brand, but she learned to manage the books, to negotiate with buyers, to make decisions that would benefit their future. In the evenings, they would sit together on the porch Benjamin built, watching the sun set over the mountains and planning their life together. Tabitha wanted to expand the cabin, add proper bedrooms for the children she hoped they would have. Benjamin promised her a parlor with windows facing east, so she could read by the morning light. They faced challenges, of course. One of their cows was killed by a mountain lion, and Benjamin spent a harrowing night tracking and killing the big cat before it could take more livestock. A late summer storm destroyed part of their fence, and they spent 3 days in the blazing sun repairing it. But they faced everything together, and that made all the difference. As October approached, preparations for the wedding began in earnest. They had decided on a simple ceremony in Watsonville, with a celebration afterwards for the friends and neighbors who had become important to them. Tabitha had befriended several women in town during her time settling her affairs, and they insisted on helping her make a proper dress, even though she protested that it was too much for a second wedding. "Nonsense," said Martha Patterson, the wife of the local blacksmith. "This is your real wedding, the one where you marry for love. It deserves a proper dress." Tabitha had hugged her, grateful for the acceptance. The night before the wedding, Benjamin could barely sleep. He kept checking the ring he had bought, a simple gold band with a small sapphire set in it, blue as a Wyoming sky. It had cost him dearly, but the look on Tabitha's face when he had shown it to her had been worth every penny. The wedding day dawned clear and warm, one of those perfect autumn days that seemed painted by a divine hand. Benjamin stood at the altar of the small church in Watsonville, his heart pounding, waiting for his bride. He wore his best suit, newly purchased for the occasion, and his hair was slicked back in a way that made him feel awkward but that Tabitha had assured him looked handsome. Then the door opened, and Tabitha appeared, and Benjamin forgot how to breathe. She wore a dress of deep blue silk, the color of her engagement ring. It was not a traditional white gown, but it suited her perfectly, bringing out the gold in her eyes and the roses in her cheeks. Her dark hair was pinned up with small flowers woven through it. She was the most beautiful thing Benjamin had ever seen. Tabitha walked down the aisle alone, having no father to give her away, her eyes locked on Benjamin's face. When she reached him, he took her hands in his, marveling at how perfectly they fit together. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. They spoke their vows in clear, strong voices, promising to love and honor each other all the days of their lives. When the minister pronounced them man and wife, Benjamin kissed his bride with all the love and passion he had been holding back, and the congregation erupted in cheers and applause. The celebration afterward was joyous. There was food and music and dancing. Benjamin, who had never been much for dancing, waltzed with his wife under the stars, both of them laughing at his missteps. Tabitha glowed with happiness, and Benjamin could not stop touching her, as if to reassure himself that she was real, that this was truly his life now. As the evening wound down, they said their goodbyes and climbed into the wagon for the journey home. Benjamin had decorated it with ribbons at Tabitha's friend's insistence, and they fluttered in the moonlight as they rode. When they reached the cabin, Benjamin carried Tabitha over the threshold, making her shriek with surprised laughter. He set her down gently in the middle of the room, his hands lingering on her waist. "Welcome home, Mrs. Brooks," he said softly. "I've been home since the day you carried me in from the blizzard," Tabitha replied, reaching up to frame his face with her hands. "But now it is perfect." They came together in a kiss that held all the promise and passion of their wedding night. And when Benjamin carried his wife to their marriage bed, it was with a heart so full of love he thought it might burst. The years that followed were not without hardship, as no life in the Wild West could be. But Benjamin and Tabitha faced everything together, their love growing stronger with each challenge overcome. In the spring of 1879, Tabitha discovered she was expecting their first child. She was nervous, having heard stories of the dangers of childbirth, but Benjamin was there for her every step of the way. He read everything he could about pregnancy and babies, much to Tabitha's amusement. Their son was born in December of that year, a healthy baby boy with his mother's dark hair and his father's blue eyes. They named him Thomas Benjamin Brooks, after the driver who had died trying to help Tabitha and Benjamin's father. Benjamin wept when he held his son for the first time, overwhelmed by the love he felt for this tiny, perfect being. Tabitha proved to be a wonderful mother, patient and loving but firm when needed. Benjamin marveled at how naturally she took to it, even when Thomas was colicky and cried for hours, or when he was teething and kept them up all night. As Thomas grew, Benjamin taught him about horses and cattle, about reading the weather and respecting the land. Tabitha taught him his letters and numbers, filling his head with stories and poems. They were a team in parenting as they were in everything else. 2 years later, a daughter joined the family. Emma Rose Brooks was a tiny thing, delicate like her mother, with a sunny disposition that made everyone who met her smile. Thomas was initially skeptical of his little sister, but soon became fiercely protective of her. The cabin, which Benjamin had expanded significantly in the early years of their marriage, rang with the sounds of children playing, laughter, and life. Sometimes, when Benjamin came in from working and saw his family gathered around the dinner table, Tabitha serving up a meal with Emma on her hip and Thomas chattering about his day, he had to pause and give thanks for the blizzard that had brought them all together. In 1883, tragedy struck when a harsh winter killed off a significant portion of their cattle herd. It was a devastating financial blow, and for a time, Benjamin worried they might lose everything. But Tabitha refused to give up. She took in sewing and sold butter and eggs in town. Benjamin took on extra work at the army fort. Thomas, now 4, even helped by collecting eggs and feeding the chickens. They survived, though it was a near thing. The experience taught them the value of diversification, and in the years that followed, they built up not just their cattle operation but also kept horses, grew crops, and established multiple income streams. It made them more stable and secure. By 1888, the Brooks family was well established and respected in the community. Thomas was 9, a serious boy who loved helping his father and dreamed of being a rancher himself one day. Emma was 7, bright and curious, with her mother's love of reading and her father's fearlessness. That year, Tabitha discovered she was pregnant again, much to everyone's surprise. She was 35 now, and they had assumed their family was complete. But when baby James arrived that October, 9 years to the day after their wedding, they all agreed he was meant to be. Benjamin was 58 now, his hair more gray than brown, but he was still strong and capable. He would often ride the boundaries of their land, now expanded to several hundred acres, and reflect on the turns his life had taken. He had expected to live and die a lonely bachelor. Instead, he had been given a love that sustained him, children who filled his heart, and a life richer than any he could have imagined. Tabitha, too, had found peace and joy she had never known in her first marriage. Sometimes she thought of Robert, feeling a gentle affection and gratitude that he had been kind to her. But what she had with Benjamin was something entirely different. It was passion and partnership, friendship and fire. It was everything she had wondered about that night by the fire when she had asked if love could be more. As the children grew, the Brooks home became known for its hospitality. Travelers were always welcome to a meal and a place to sleep. Neighbors came to Tabitha for advice, and to Benjamin for help with difficult livestock or building projects. They were pillars of their community, respected and loved. Thomas grew into a fine young man, steady and reliable. At 20, he married a sweet girl named Sarah from a neighboring ranch, and they built a house on Brooks' land. When Benjamin and Tabitha's first grandchild was born in 1895, Benjamin held the tiny girl in his weathered hands and felt the circle of life complete itself in the most beautiful way. Emma, always the adventurous one, became a teacher, much to her mother's delight. She moved to Watsonville to teach at the schoolhouse, though she visited the ranch often. She eventually married a doctor, a good man who respected her intelligence and independent spirit. James, the surprise baby, inherited his father's way with horses. By the time he was 15, he was training horses for people all over the territory. He had a gift, a gentle patience that made even the most skittish animal trust him. In the summer of 1900, Benjamin and Tabitha celebrated their 22nd wedding anniversary with a party attended by what seemed like half the county. Their children, their grandchildren, and countless friends gathered to honor a marriage that had become legendary in its own small way. The story of the blizzard, the rescue, and the love that had bloomed from it was told and retold, growing slightly more dramatic with each telling, much to Benjamin and Tabitha's amusement. As Benjamin danced with his wife under strings of lights hung in their yard, her hair now streaked with silver but her eyes still as bright as ever, he whispered in her ear, "Do you remember when I promised you a life together?" "I remember everything," Tabitha said, leaning into him. "Every word, every moment. You gave me so much more than I ever dreamed possible." "We gave each other everything," Benjamin corrected, "and I would do it all again. Every hard day, every challenge, every moment of fear or doubt, it was all worth it to have you by my side." Tabitha kissed him, not caring that their children and grandchildren and all their friends were watching. "I love you, Benjamin Brooks. From that first moment when you carried me out of the storm, I think part of me knew you would be my salvation in more ways than one." As the stars wheeled overhead and music played and their family laughed and danced around them, Benjamin held his wife close and thanked whatever providence had sent a blizzard to bring him the greatest gift of his life. He had been a lonely cowboy in a cabin in the middle of nowhere, and now he was surrounded by love, by family, by a legacy that would continue long after he was gone. Years later, when Benjamin was 68 and Tabitha was 62, they would sit on the porch of their expanded home, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. James still lived on the ranch with them, having taken over most of the day-to-day operations. Thomas ran his own successful ranch on the adjoining land. Emma visited often from town with her husband and children. One evening, as the sun set in spectacular fashion, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Tabitha took Benjamin's hand. "Did you ever imagine it would be like this?" Benjamin squeezed her fingers gently. "Not in a million years. I thought I would grow old alone, just me and the land and the cattle. I never dreamed I could be this happy." That blizzard was the worst and best thing that ever happened to me, Tabitha mused. I was running from grief, lost in more ways than one, and you found me. You saved me. We saved each other, Benjamin said, a familiar refrain in their long marriage. You brought light and love and laughter into a life that had none of those things. You gave me children, a family, a reason to build something lasting. Everything good in my life stems from the day you stumbled into my world. Tabitha leaned her head on his shoulder, comfortable and content. Tell me we have many more years like this. As many as God grants us, Benjamin promised. And when our time comes, I will find you again, somewhere beyond, and we will start all over. That is a beautiful thought, Tabitha said softly. They sat in companionable silence as the stars began to appear, one by one, in the darkening sky. From inside the house, they could hear James talking to his wife about the new foals due in spring. In the distance, a coyote called, and closer by, an owl hooted its twilight greeting. Benjamin reflected on the full circle his life had made. He had come west seeking a fresh start, running from the loss of his parents and the emptiness of his old life. He had built something solid and good with his own hands, but it had not been complete until a blizzard brought him a freezing widow who needed shelter. Tabitha had been running too, fleeing from grief and confusion, and a life that had felt like a cage disguised as comfort. She had nearly died in that storm, but instead she had been reborn into a love so deep and true, it had transformed everything. Their children had grown strong and happy, raised with love and taught to value hard work, integrity, and kindness. Their grandchildren would carry those lessons forward, and their grandchildren after them. The Brooks name would endure in this corner of Wyoming, tied forever to the land Benjamin and Tabitha had built together. As they grew older, Benjamin's body began to slow. His joints ached on cold mornings, and he could not work the long hours he once had. But James was there to take up the slack, and Thomas was always willing to help. Tabitha's eyes grew weaker, making it harder for her to read the books she loved, but Emma would visit and read aloud to her mother, continuing a tradition Tabitha had started decades before. They grew old together with grace and gratitude, never taking for granted the gift of each new day. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1908, their children threw them another party, smaller this time, just family. Benjamin was 76, Tabitha was 70. They were both showing their years, but their love had not dimmed. Thomas stood to make a toast. His own children gathered around him. To my parents, who showed us all what real love looks like. You built something beautiful together, not just this ranch, but a family, a legacy, a love that has been the foundation of everything good in our lives. We are all here because of your courage, your dedication to each other, and your unwavering faith that love conquers all. Everyone raised their glasses, and Benjamin saw Tabitha wipe away tears. He put his arm around her, pulling her close, and whispered, "No crying. This is a happy day." "They are happy tears," Tabitha assured him. "I am just overwhelmed by how blessed we are." Benjamin had to agree. The years continued to pass. Benjamin made it to his 80th birthday in 1912, a remarkable age for a man who had lived such a physically demanding life. His mind remained sharp even as his body continued to slow. Tabitha, at 74, was still active, still involved in her children's and grandchildren's lives, still the heart of their home. On a crisp October morning in 1913, Benjamin woke before dawn as he had done for most of his life. He lay in bed next to Tabitha, listening to her gentle breathing, and felt a profound sense of peace. He had lived a good life. He had loved deeply and been loved in return. He had worked hard, raised fine children, and left the world better than he had found it. When Tabitha woke a short time later, she found Benjamin watching her with such tenderness in his eyes that her breath caught. "What is it?" she asked, reaching to touch his weathered face. "I am just appreciating you," Benjamin said. "Every day I get to wake up next to you is a gift." They rose and went about their morning routine, moving slowly but comfortably around each other after so many years of partnership. James and his wife lived in the main house with them now, and the sounds of their young children getting ready for the day filled the rooms with noise and energy. Benjamin spent that day doing light chores, visiting with his grandchildren, and simply enjoying the golden autumn weather. That evening, he and Tabitha sat on their porch as the sun set, a ritual they had maintained for decades. "Tabitha," Benjamin said quietly, taking her hand, "if I could go back to that day the blizzard brought you to me and do it all again, I would not change a single thing. You have been the greatest blessing of my life." Tabitha looked at him, her brow furrowing slightly. "Why are you talking like this? You sound as if you are saying goodbye." "Not goodbye," Benjamin said, squeezing her hand. "Never goodbye, just making sure you know how much you are loved." That night, Benjamin Brooks died peacefully in his sleep, his wife curled beside him. When Tabitha woke and realized he was gone, she did not scream or wail. Instead, she lay beside him for a long moment, her hand over his heart, and thanked him for every year, every day, every moment they had shared. The funeral was attended by what seemed like everyone in the county. Benjamin had been respected and loved, known for his fairness, his hard work, and his devotion to his family. But it was Tabitha who gave the eulogy, standing strong despite her grief, her children and grandchildren arrayed around her. "My husband saved my life," she said simply. "I was lost in a blizzard, freezing and alone, and he brought me into his home and into his heart. He asked nothing in return except the privilege of loving me. For 34 years, he was my partner, my best friend, my greatest love. He taught our children about integrity and hard work. He showed our grandchildren what it means to be a good man. And he gave me a life so full of love and joy that I cannot regret a single moment, even though I miss him more than words can say." Her voice broke then, and Thomas stepped forward to support his mother. But Tabitha gathered herself and continued. "Benjamin always said we saved each other, and it is true. I had been living half a life before I met him. He showed me what it meant to truly live, to truly love. I will carry that with me for whatever time I have left. And when my time comes, I know he will be waiting for me, ready to start our next adventure together." Tabitha lived for 5 more years, active and involved in her family's lives to the end. She was surrounded by children and grandchildren who adored her, and she took great joy in seeing the ranch continue to thrive under James's management. But everyone could see that a light had gone out in her when Benjamin died. She carried on with grace and strength, but she was never quite whole again. On October 1st, 1918, exactly 40 years to the day after her wedding to Benjamin, Tabitha Morrison Brooks died quietly in her sleep. Her family found her in the morning, a peaceful smile on her face, her hands stretched out across the bed as if reaching for someone only she could see. They buried her next to Benjamin on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. The headstone reads simply, "Benjamin and Tabitha Brooks." Their love conquered the storm and built a legacy that endures. The ranch continued through the generations, passed down through James and his children, and then their children after them. The story of the blizzard and the cowboy and the freezing widow became family legend, told and retold with each generation. The original cabin, expanded and added onto so many times, eventually became a museum of sorts, preserved by the family as a reminder of where it all began. And on cold winter nights when the wind howled across the Wyoming plains, when snow fell thick and fast and the world turned white. Some said you could see two figures standing on the porch of that old cabin. A tall man with broad shoulders and a slight woman with dark hair, their arms around each other, watching the storm together. Watching and waiting and loving each other still, even beyond death. The love story that had begun in a blizzard had transcended time itself, becoming something more than just memory. It became inspiration, proof that even in the harshest conditions, even when all seems lost, love can bloom. That sometimes the worst storms bring the greatest blessings. That courage and compassion can transform lives in ways we never expect. Benjamin and Tabitha's descendants continued to tell their story, to honor their memory, to try to live up to the example they had set. The Brooks Ranch remained a fixture in Wyoming, a testament to two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. And somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, Benjamin and Tabitha were together still, dancing under starlight, whispering words of love, grateful for the blizzard that had brought them together, and the love that had sustained them through everything that followed. Their story was complete, their circle closed, their legacy assured. They had lived fully, loved deeply, and left the world richer for their presence in it. And that, in the end, was all anyone could hope for: a life well lived, a love well earned, and a family that would carry their story forward into the future. The blizzard had brought a freezing widow to a cowboy's cabin. The cowboy had warmed her and won her tender heart. And together, they had created something that would last far beyond their years on earth, a love story for the ages, set in the Wild West, as enduring as the mountains that watched over their land.